Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Interesting People in Interesting Places. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Bill Mangum. Bill, I have to say, you're literally one of the only artists I know that has also been financially successful in your own time. I would consider you as much a businessman as I would an artist. So I would love to hear um, how you were able to do this, when it all started. Give us and your audience a little background on you, if you would.
Well, it definitely has been a unique journey along the way. From the time I was a little kid, I knew that I wanted to be an artist. Matter of fact, I was raised by my aunts and uncles from the time I was 8 years old for a period of years. And it was there at Boone Trail High School, K through 12, that one of my third grade teachers took a drawing of mine, entered it in the state fair, and it won this big blue ribbon. And that was the first adulation and really the genesis of thinking that maybe I might be an artist.
And where was this? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up on a rural farm down in Mamers, North Carolina, which many people have never heard of, but it's outside of Lillington. The metropolitan city, Sanford, was like Manhattan to me back in the day.
Well,
But
this explains your love of North Carolina, because I know a big hallmark of your work has been capturing beautiful scenes from North Carolina, which I know we're going to get to later on in our conversation. But I'd love for you to tell us how you knew early on that, I mean, was it that you could see? Because I always find with artists, it's not just the skill of being able to do, it's being able to see what to do, right?
yeah, well, I have to be honest with you. A lot of insecurities were instilled in me at a young age. My mom had a stroke when I was just a child. So we were living on a naval base and I was brought to a tobacco farm overnight. And that change really sort of just I had to entertain myself a lot. And crayons and pencils and drawings was that medium that allowed me to kind of escape. And I I did not enjoy growing up on a farm when I was a child. It wasn't until many years later that I began to appreciate those early lessons that I learned that instilled in me a form of celebrating my roots of North
Yeah,
Carolina. And I'm like,
yeah.
we're going to talk about that a little bit.
Well, is there a way that you could show us like one of the first pieces you ever did, for example?
Well, let's try. All right. So here is Billy Mangum, 8 years old, Boone Trail
Oh,
High School. And some of these pieces that you're looking at were not actually the third grade work, but middle school, high school. Academically, I was very challenged. I didn't really apply myself, but I did have a talent and I was able to use that for extra credit, doing bulletin boards in school. That's how I got out of Spanish. That's how I passed chemistry and science, was by illustrating my poor academic work with great artwork. And
interesting. So were these copies of things that you were looking at in like inside your school books, or were these things that you took real life things from 3D to 2D?
well, back in the day, I'm sure much of our audience would be, we had encyclopedias.
Yeah,
That was the Google
I
back.
remember those.
So I would, look up reference. I would, as a kid, I loved automobiles, and I would lean into drawing hot rods, and I would fantasize about some of my heroes like Vikings and draw those. But all of that early on is what kind of just led to finishing high school. We got our first art teacher my senior year, Miss McDuffie, and I'll never forget her allowing me to use art as a means. And she encouraged me to go on to school, went to a community college. And then from there, um, trying to go back to where we were, there we are. Um, it wasn't until I got to college that I really was able to apply myself. And I actually began to sell paintings, artwork when I was in school.
Yeah. So I would say, growing up and using art as a means to entertain yourself, many people could have also used literature, reading or writing. I mean, there's a myriad of things. So you naturally had an affinity for, you were visual, clearly,
Mhm.
right? This is how you expressed yourself, and you kept honing that skill until you did, I think, your first watercolor. I think you told me you had done that for your mom. Is that right?
That is right. My senior year at UNCG, I transferred in as an art
Oh
major,
my goodness, gorgeous.
and I was doing my student teaching up in Stokes County. And I came back to the dorm as any student, didn't have any money. So I went to a local dime store, Woolworths at Friendly, and I bought a 59-cent tray of watercolors, pulled out a sheet of drawing paper, and this was the first painting, watercolor painting that I ever did. I went
And
back
I
and
mean, it's just beautifully done. For those in the audience that don't paint, I happen to be like an amateur painter. So let me just point out a couple of things here. For example, the fact that you use these purples and blues in the snow, a lot of people would not naturally do that. And the edges, like in the far distance, your edges of the mountains or the hill with the sky, they're just beautiful and soft like they are in nature. A lot of amateurs would make a hard edge there. And so immediately this looks professional from the get-go.
well, I really didn't know what I was doing. The economics were right. 59 cents, $2.98 frame. When I gave it to mom, she said, Billy, that is really something special. You should do more. So
Yeah.
when I got back to school, I took my life savings, $4.98, and I went and I bought a Grumbacher set of watercolors. And I'm not sure what's going on. And
I should let our audience know that if you had chosen oil paints, for example, in today's terms, like one tube of lead paint could easily be $30. So watercolor was definitely the easiest way for you to enter the field if you were struggling with finances, right?
exactly. So can you see this painting
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's beautiful.
All right. So 2 years later, I went from that 59-cent tray of watercolors to doing this piece called West Jefferson, and it won some significant awards at the Watercolor Society. The beauty of watercolors is that when you look at this painting, the white that you see of the snow is actually the white of the paper. So you typically don't use white paints
Yeah.
when you paint with watercolors. So I had great meteoric success early on with my career, and I would venture and I would celebrate really kind of what was in our own backyard.
I mean,
Uh,
the tree looks so, the bark, what's really interesting to me looking at this as a layperson is that watercolor is generally very translucent. It's not as opaque as the way that you've been able to make, you know, the trees, for example, and the logs in this log cabin just really don't even look like watercolor.
well, that's what really set me apart was the way that I handled the medium. I was
Yeah.
always a photorealist from the very beginning, and you make a good point. Many artists would take and they would uh, watercolors was typically used out in the field. So you were spontaneous and you were just capturing the essence of a subject. But I would take and I would refine it and move it to a different level. And that's how I began to win all kinds of recognition for the way that I had used my mediums. So going from, the mountains to the Piedmont to the coast, North Carolina really is an artist paradise. And that's what I recognized early on, that people love to collect things that they were familiar with. So my subject matter early on was North Carolina.
Yeah, the other thing about watercolor, just so people can further appreciate your talent, Bill, is that it's very unforgiving, unlike oil paint. So once you put down the color with watercolor, it's not like you can scrape it off or keep going over it to make this other color the way that you do with oils or even acrylic. So you really have to be a really good draftsman, because I think every stroke is sort of its own drawing, really, right?
Well, yes, to a degree, but I think that's what really separates amateurs from professionals is that ability to correct your mistakes. I
Yeah.
mean, all of my paintings had lots of mistakes in them, but it was the ability to separate and improve or fix. There was always something worthy to hang on to in the paintings. So, after a handful of years, the next status was really trying to get my work out before the public. And so I opened up my own gallery in 1982. And in order to survive, I really wanted to treat it as a business. So this was my first gallery at Lawndale Shopping Center. It was a remnant of a ladies' clothing store
And
at
what year was this, Bill?
1982.
Okay, yeah.
And Weezy Gordon was my first gallery director. She worked with me for 10 years. And we wound up doing all kinds of wonderful shows and exhibitions, but you had to make yourself accessible is what I wanted to say, to the public. So having your own gallery meant that you had to be there every day, and you sort of formulated and started working forward. At the time when I was really working, there was another artist by the name of Bob Timberlake. And so often people would compare me to him. And that was great, but I felt that my talent was much deeper. So my brother came up with the idea of getting patrons. And what we would do is have people underwrite my trips abroad. And this is really what grew me professionally as an artist, was to go to locales like England and capture all sorts of different architecture, because that was my natural gift. And then I would go to places like the Greek Isles, and I would study and work there. And once again, when you look at the white of these buildings, that is the white of the paper. So transparently celebrating the medium in this fashion was unprecedented. And
You mean leaving the white in was not something that most people did at that time?
well, I was able to create a luminosity in my
Yeah,
paintings that was very rare.
just
At the
using
time.
the white of the paper to capture light.
Yeah. And, going abroad to these different areas, the light is so different in all of those locales. And it really challenged me, quite amazing. These are paintings from Italy, from the Portofino coastline. So I love the texture of old weathered buildings and gardens. And that's really where I grew quite prolific. Winslow Homer is one of my favorite artists early on. And
Love the
hmm,
fish.
the
Sorry to
Portofino.
interrupt, but that's really beautiful.
Well, thank you. And, once again, you could take the medium out into the field. You could be very loose and spontaneous with it, but at the same time, take it to a level that many artists never truly could.
Yeah. The interesting thing, Bill, is it sounds like this is where you really grew your and stretched yourself. But most people, I think in North Carolina, at least that know you, I never knew until you shared with me this sort of European access that you had, because everything that I saw was always, UNC Chapel Hill or the coastline or the mountains of North Carolina. So you had kind of a dual track, it sounds like. Oh, Bill, I think you're muted.
Yes, you're right. Okay, there we go.
There you go.
So you're absolutely right. But I wanted to see if I could grow professionally. And those early times of traveling abroad really allowed me to expand my audience, not only from a North Carolina base, but to a national and an international base. And the way that I was able to leverage my creations was having the work published, was reproducing the paintings and having accessibility where you could take an original painting, you could reproduce it and make it into 500 copies, 750 copies, and then you would sell those for anywhere from $100 to $200 each. And all of a sudden, a $5,000 painting became worth $50,000 when you were able to reproduce it and market it all across the state of North Carolina.
And so did you do that in books or the print, individual prints? And would people pay as much for a reproduction as they would the original?
No, back in the early 80s, most of my originals would sell anywhere from $1,500 to $5,000. Occasionally I would get $10,000. But when you could take a painting such as this, American Way, and reproduce it, these prints sold for $25. This actually was a painting I did as a fundraiser for United Way. Believe it or not, that painting raised $250,000 for United Way, selling $25 prints. So that was the power of leveraging your talent and being able to sprinkle your work literally across the country.
Yeah. One thing I noticed about you is, and I know a lot of artists in my day, they all want to paint what they want to paint, find their own voice and do the work for themselves and hope that someone else likes it. Where what I hear from you is your business skills allowed you to capture what it is your audience wanted, as opposed to what necessarily you wanted. And maybe they were the same, but what your audience wanted was what allowed you to sell the work and actually make it as an artist financially.
Well, the one thing that I've always enjoyed, I really felt like there was an art to marketing, an
Yeah.
art to selling yourself. And over the years, after 10, 15 years, my work had grown to, I had done thousands of paintings. I mean, to date, I've created more than 4,000 originals. But what really began to make you more of a collectible artist was the ability to put it into a volume of work. This book called Carolina Preserves was actually my second book that I did. And I had this idea, this is how living on a tobacco farm, living with my Aunt Kate, allowed me to use her gifts. She was a great gardener, and what she instilled on me was to remember where you come from and how it used to be. So I thought to myself, why not go to different North Carolinians and have them share their stories of what North Carolina meant to them and put it in a book and illustrate it. So I had 48 North Carolinians write for me, people like Michael Jordan to Dean Smith to Bill Cecil, who owns the Biltmore Estate, governors and teachers. And from all walks of life, we were able to capture the essence and pay tribute to North Carolina. Matter of fact, PBS UNC TV came along and they did a film based on this book. And there was also an exhibition at the North Carolina Museum of Art. And all of that led, you remember that little hole in the wall that I
Yeah,
started?
but I remember this beautiful gallery, which this is what I was used to seeing in my years when I did live in Greensboro.
Yeah, so by 1995, I had enough of a following that I was able to build my own gallery. And that became a showcase of really where you could not only share your paintings, but also leverage it into reproductions and calendars and just a myriad of different products.
You're such a model for us and all of our clients, because in my opinion, you've just lived a charmed life in terms of you knew what you liked to do and you were able to actually pursue it and make a living at it. More than a living, you were actually able to develop national notoriety, maybe international notoriety with it.
Well, thank you. But let me back up and say I have made a lot of mistakes. And I think early on, probably the greatest mistake was I overexposed myself financially. I had meteoric success in college, but I did not know how to handle my money. And I
Mhm.
had to file a straight bankruptcy 3 years after I graduated from college. And
Wow.
that is what really put life in perspective for me. And I didn't appreciate my talent as an artist early on. I thought anybody could do what I did. I mean, remember, I bought a 59-cent tray of watercolors.
Yeah.
But that's when I kind of knew the Lord had, kind of give me something special. And I asked for some forgiveness and if he'd give me a second chance. But it was the business acumen that really allowed me to grow it to my height. When the business was really strong in the late 90s, early 2000s, I had 17 on staff. And we were creating all kinds of marvelous product where your paintings could be put into books and miniature prints, note cards, cherry boxes, mugs, paperweights. It's just,
You name it, it was
yeah,
there.
I mean, it was anywhere that you wanted to take it. So what I did was I began to come alongside companies and entities, and I used art as a means of helping them celebrate their brand. So the Biltmore Estate, for example, was going through their bicentennial, and I approached them about doing a series of paintings to celebrate the majesty and the heritage of the largest house in America. And it was phenomenal to walk the grounds and to do things that many artists just really never had the privilege of working inside. So that was one example.
Yeah, and I love how, you came up with the idea. So you were not only a master marketer for yourself, but you were a helper of marketing for all these other North Carolina iconic buildings and institutions.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, there's everybody has a fondness for where they went to school. And so why not go back to those areas and work with them and help these universities celebrate, their icons. And it was fantastic. And so we made reproductions and we worked through the alumni associations of each one of these universities. And these reproductions were highly popular. And we wound up making a good amount of money from them.
And so I know at some point, and this is what really blows my mind, is you had this amazing success, and instead of continuing to do what you did, you made a radical shift and went from almost what I would call surrealism to abstract art. And not only that, but you changed mediums. The watercolor kind of went by the wayside, and I think you switched to acrylic. So I think that's especially instructive for our viewers, is that many times we get to an age and stage where we think we've kind of done what we're going to do, and we're going to
Mhm.
kind of retire and throw in the towel. There's nothing new under the sun, as they say. But I'm so impressed by the fact that you never stopped.
Right.
So tell us a little about that
How
journey and what made you make that switch.
Well, that transition came about when I was actually working with a company called Klausner. I was helping them celebrate their brand. And we did a series of artist inspired home collections. And about into the fifth one, it came time that we had gone from the mountains to the coast, Piedmont, and we wanted to do a contemporary event. So we did this creation called Simply Urban. Well, my traditional watercolors would not really sort of celebrate that brand, that stylization. So the fellow that brought me on, Jeff Beeston, said, Bill, do you think you could do some contemporary artwork to complement this? And I wonder where that went. Sorry.
No,
Um,
that's okay. But I could clearly see that where it went did not match the style.
exactly. So with that, let me get back. We'll find that here real quick. Find the right page as I toggle
No,
back.
no worries. I remember seeing it for the first time when we had an event in Chapel Hill, and you brought some of your modern pieces, and I was it was so radically different than the work that I had seen that I couldn't believe it was your work, honestly.
Well, there was a lot of hand holding early on as I transitioned from watercolors to acrylics. And but with that came as you began to explain it to folks, they really began to understand. And it was my longtime collectors that really bought into it because a lot of folks were transitioning
Wow.
into their own.
Sorry to interrupt, but you can't put that up there and just not be amazed at the transition in your prior work to this work. Doesn't even look like the same voice, the same artist, the same medium, anything.
You're right. And those were some baby steps. But we also did a book called Transitions that really kind of held the hand to that. So you can see I went from watercolors to a new medium of acrylics, and it allowed me to continue to paint my landscapes in a very soft style, but complementing that, I was able to do acrylic canvas paintings where the texture was very rich, and you would do layers of transparency and blocking in. And these were the complements to that new furniture collection. Well, lo and behold, a lot of our publishers admired this dexterity, this ability to cross over. And with acrylics, you can work in a variety of different fashions. Actually, this is a poured painting where I stretched the canvas on 4 stools and I was able to pour them off, and they create all kinds of amazing blossoms so that this was the finished piece. And it was
Now,
a
Bill, did you thin your acrylic with water, or is this pure acrylic? It looks a little thinned. It has a slight watercolorish aspect to it, is my point.
Yes, well, you can see like up in this corner, these blossoms that were taking place. You had to thin the painting down where you could pour it. So the various weights of the viscosity of the paints are what made all these amazing transitions and play on the canvas. And then you had to help it along and you had to come back and clean it up. But it really made for some extraordinary work. So today, that's what I do. I mean, I continue to have these marvelous contemporary works, but I never forget where I came from, like my Aunt Kate would say. And landscape still is in my soul and I guess in my shoes. But you can see that this new direction has afforded me a lot of opportunity to grow into the hospitality trade where my paintings are used to decorate Marriott hotels, where all 400 rooms would have my artwork in them. And corporately, today, I am commissioned to come inside and help decorate lobbies. And this is just a portion of my studio where I work. So at any given time, I'm working on 5 to 6 paintings at a time. And annually, I do anywhere from 85 to 100 originals. And the scale of my work, from the little watercolors that I would do, or the biggest watercolors were maybe 30 by 48 inches. Today, my paintings are 7 by 9 feet. I just finished a commission that was 23 feet long. And I'm
So I
having
have to ask you, as I don't know if you're a boomer or not, but how
yeah.
long is this going to go on? Because I think the work you do is pretty strenuous. I mean, standing and painting all day is not easy, especially now that you're doing these bigger pieces and pouring and stretching them out over stools and whatnot. Do you paint every day, and how long?
Okay, so I get to the studio at 8 o'clock sharp most mornings, and my day is I paint until 1 o'clock hard.
Okay, yeah.
And then in the afternoon, my associate comes in, Joy, that's been with me for nearly 30 years, and we determine how are we going to sell what I've created. So I'm wearing these 2 hats, and how do we leverage it? And you capture the library of your work digitally, and then you send it off to your publishers. It's a big, small business. So it is that variety that keeps me entertained. I'll never retire. Why should I retire?
Because you love it. That's why. I mean, I work with a
That's
lot
why
of
I should
clients
retire.
who they're dying to retire, but I think you're not retiring because you really just love what you're doing, what you were meant to do.
Well, there's so much more to do, and I will never get to all of the creations that I have in my mind or turn it off. But we're raising a granddaughter right now. Jaden is in the 10th grade, so that motivates me to teach her and encourage her and take her to school in the morning. So Cynthia and I, we get to travel a little bit, but I have so many contemporaries of mine that have retired, and a year or two, they're scratching their head and they're really kind of bored.
Yeah, no,
So
I know.
count,
And
I count my
I
blessings.
hate to say, but the boredom eventually kind of leads to, anxiety, depression for those people who don't do well in retirement. I mean, we have a lot of people that flunk retirement. And so they're trying to reinvent themselves, and it's hard to get back in once you've disengaged. So you really have to have something that you love doing to just keep you getting out of bed every day.
Well, and I do believe in everyone's livelihood, there's opportunities in there for them to transition in what they were really good at,
Yeah,
even to mentor, to share with others. When I was an amateur artist, or when I was in school and I got out and I had this good success, I was telling students that wanted to be an artist, I said, okay, so what's the next rung on your ladder? Because in school, you've got these benchmarks, you got rungs put in front of you with the
yeah,
teacher. But if you don't have something every day to reach for, you're going to slip, you're going to fall. And so I'm working a year in advance, a year and a half, 2 years in advance of where I want to take my business and or experiment and grow, set a theme for a show, set an area, a locale to do something. I'm so grateful to
well, I
be here.
have to say it's a true honor and privilege to talk to you today, Bill. I look forward to seeing, and I'm sure our audience does, how your paintings evolve and what you're going to do next. You're an inspiration for all of us. So I think the message for me is don't ever throw in the towel, just figure out the next step, right?
It's true. And I learned many years ago, never throw away a painting, set it aside, come back and look at it with fresh eyes, maybe a day, a week, or a year. But there's always some essence, some kernel there to save within the creation.
Interesting. That's how you learn from your past and hopefully build on it, right?
Sure, sure.
Thank you, Bill. It's a pleasure having you today.
My pleasure.